Hi, I'm Donna Ray.
And I'm Al Wadley.
Welcome to our podcast, Feldenkrais for Life.
In each episode, we will discuss ideas and experiences pertaining to the Feldenkrais method.
You're going to learn skills that will move pain to comfort, anxiety to ease, and we'll explore learning and how to spark creativity.
To learn more about Donna, visit her site at donnaray.com.
To find Al Wadley, go to achievingexcellence.com.
Hey, Donna.
Hey, Al. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, too. I'm looking forward to this discussion that we have planned.
Me too. It's one of our favorite topics.
Learning, unlearning, and how that relates to our self-image, and all the way from our infant development to who we are as adults.
And talking about different kinds of learning, how different kinds of learning are different from what we do in Feldenkrais method. So learning academically versus learning in Feldenkrais lessons, learning developmentally compared to how you learn when you go to school, and the kinds of, I guess you might call it, incidental or unintentional learning that happens when we go into situations like when we're children and we go into a classroom or we go to religious service and we have to behave in certain ways. There's a degree of learning that takes place there that's not necessarily intentional, but it's like we have to conform to certain social standards. We need to learn to behave and be good girls and boys.
Yeah, and you have to learn how to inhibit yourself. Stop fiddling, stop making noise, stop doing the things that you're interested in doing.
Yeah, stop acting like a child.
Yes, yeah. Stop expressing your curiosity. So you inhibit yourself to stop feeling and acting according to what you're interested in.
Yeah, and so that's not necessarily something that we learn to just inhibit, to prevent, but we usually end up adding more effort in order to do that. We add more effort to constrain our behavior, to limit ourselves, and try and fit into the mold that society or our parents, teachers want us to fit into.
That's so true. And of course, we have to have some semblance of order in a classroom with a group of kids. So children need to learn how to speak when it's their turn and get up and move in the room when it's their turn. It seems to me there's an overemphasis on the conformity and not enough emphasis on exploration.
Yeah, there's the need of a society for members to participate in it and adhere to some kind of social norm, or it might have total chaos. At least that's what it would be perceived to be if we didn't have these constraints of behaving in these certain ways as children or even as adults, that we might have total chaos in society. I don't really believe that. I think that if we were allowed to develop in ways that truly expressed ourselves and we got to truly be ourselves and fulfill our desires and curiosity and explore the world as we liked, that we'd probably have a much richer, more dynamic and colorful society.
I think so. And we know that there are examples of schools like Montessori and other schools where they have little playstations or workstations, and kids can move around from one place to the other. And they could be doing something like playing with beads and counting them, or stacking blocks and learning how to add and subtract by handling things. And one of the, I guess you would call it a proverb in a way, that Feldenkrais loved to say to his students is, I hear and forget, I see and remember, I do and understand. And that is, in fact, it's how we learn in the Feldenkrais method. We do it all. For example, if you want to learn skeletal anatomy, you can do the movements, sense your skeleton. You can imagine the movements of your skeleton. We have a skeleton in the room so people can go and touch the bones. And then they touch the bones in their own body. And then we go to another person and find those bones on another human being. And you begin to actually sense, feel, and visualize the bones of the skeleton and how they move and how they work. And not only in a stationary situation, but while moving, so they make more sense. And it's not just in training programs. I used to teach kids kindergarten through 12th grade Feldenkrais lessons, and I always had a skeleton with me, and they loved learning anatomy that way. All the kids of all ages.
It's learning through doing, learning through sensing. You mentioned Montessori. Waldorf is another school like that. And some high-tech companies, too, have playrooms where employees can go in and they can toss a ball around or roll around on the floor or whatever. There's a growing acknowledgement of how important, moving and learning are. So we see this kind of shift in society, especially more progressive companies like that. Mm-hmm. You may not find it in a bank, but you go to Google and it's a different situation.
Yes, and we know that being able to play and play well, having excitement and frivolity contributes to problem solving. So when you get your mind off of what you're trying to solve and you go and you play and you interact with others and you goof around and you go back to the drawing board, new ideas, new thoughts emerge. Our brain, our nervous system needs novelty and play and stimulation. So we do that within every Feldenkrais lesson that we teach too. We start slow to enhance sensitivity, because we also know that when you reduce the stimulus, your sensitivity increases, which means you learn how to pay attention to details while you're doing what you're doing. And that granularity makes you smarter. It helps you perceive differences that you are not able to perceive with a high level of stimulus.
Yeah, it's a principle known in physics as Weber-Fechner. Also heard it pronounced as Weber-Fechner, depending on how German you are, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's about this ratio of how much effort you put into something and how much you can sense. Dr. Feldenkrais would give an example of, like, if you're carrying a sack of potatoes and a fly lands on it, you can't make that distinction. But if you've got like a feather between your index finger and your thumb and a fly lands on it, you could feel that. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of sensitivity that we want to cultivate in these lessons, because if you make those kinds of refined distinctions, you stimulate the nervous system, you stimulate the brain, and you can stimulate learning. Mm-hmm. And that's true for all the senses too. It's not just, the kinesthetic sense or the tactile sense. It's also true for vision. You're dimming a light up or down. There's a threshold point at which it becomes clear, wow, it just got brighter in here. Mm-hmm. Or with sound too. You lower the volume and go, oh, I can't hear that. So there's these variations and kind of the scaling of sense. At certain points, it becomes easier to sense. Varying the intensity of a stimulus allows you to sense it more or less.
Yes, and I was remembering the tomatis method, which is enhancing your hearing, and that also enhances your ability to learn. And so in the tomatis method, you listen to Mozart, for example, and other music as well, but the music is slightly distorted and it enhances the way that you listen. And then along with the listening, you spend time with a microphone and a headset so that you hear yourself more intensely. I actually participated in a tomatis training, and we read poetry aloud to ourselves, and the articulation of the sound feeding directly into your ears after listening to various pieces of music that are generally unfamiliar to one was extraordinary. And my hearing improved tremendously, and the ability to speak more clearly was enhanced. It was quite a phenomenal program. And this is used with people with learning difficulties, young and old.
Yeah, I have a set of tomatis audio, and I've used it over the years. Having been dyslexic, it was one of the tools I used to improve my hearing and to make finer auditory discriminations. And it was a very important tool in terms of helping me to resolve the dyslexia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not only Dr. Feldenkrais, but other physicians, scientists have used this Weber-Fechner law, as you said, in their work.
Yeah, and it plays a key role in all Feldenkrais lessons. So when we're doing a Feldenkrais lesson, we're making a movement and we guide awareness to sense how you're making that movement. We always ask you to make the movement smaller and make it slower, reduce the effort, reduce the intensity of the movement, so you can actually start to become aware of how you're moving. How are you actually doing this movement? And what are you sensing while you do it?
So, for example, if you're sitting right now or if you're standing right now, bring your attention to your feet and sense your feet on the floor. Notice your breathing while you sense your feet. And notice, is one foot resting more heavily than the other on the floor? And pay attention to that. There's no need to correct it. Just notice the weight on your feet. Now continue to pay attention to your feet, and whether standing or sitting, move your knees slightly to the right and back to the middle. And notice how you do that. There are lots of different ways to move your knees to the right while sitting and standing. Do it your way. Pay attention to your feet on the floor when you move your knees to the right and then back to the middle. Notice how the weight on your feet shifts to the outside edge of your right foot and to the inside edge of your left foot when your knees move to the right, and then bring them back to the middle. Rest for a minute and sense your feet on the ground again. And notice the weight of each foot, your right foot, your left foot, and see, are they resting more evenly now, or have they changed? Is the other foot heavier? Are you able to detect whether or not one foot is actually more weighted than the other one? So stay with this little process over the course of the day and see how your sensitivity increases. And you can take your knees to the left and back to the middle as well. And you may even find that when you move your knees to the left and back to the middle, that you have a completely different response than when you move your knees to the right and back to the middle. Now, so far, we've been sensing how the pressure of the feet change against the floor. But now move your attention upward so that you sense movement in your whole skeleton. So you simply tilt your knees to the left and back to the middle and sense your response all the way up to your head. Notice your breathing. And then tilt your knees to the right and back to the middle. Notice your breathing. Alternate one direction and the other. And sense your whole self responding. And what we've done is created a little experiment for you to begin to detect your skeleton and the shifts that are taking place. And the subtlety of response is vast. Our attention grows as we pay attention to this kind of experimentation in our movement. So I'm wondering what you're noticing, Al. I saw you doing the movements.
Yes, following along as you were describing that, and I thought it was very interesting. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring forward. One is the novelty of what you just had us do. This unusual movement of sitting or standing and shifting the knees. And at first it's kind of like, what? Shift the knees? Well, how do you do that? So we talked earlier about problem solving. There's always these little puzzles in these lessons. It's like you pose an instruction for a movement, and it's oftentimes, what? You need to do what? How do I do that? And so this element of problem solving. So, but you figure it out. So you figure out how to move the knees to the right, and then you find out, well, there's all these other things that start to happen too. So these sensations of the feet that we started out with, so you drew our attention to the feet first, well, they do something when you move the knees to the right. As you described, they shift and the weight goes to the outside of the right foot and the inside of the left foot. And so all these things happen as a result of this one little instruction. And if we were just throwing ourselves at this, making big movements, trying to just blast our way through it, we wouldn't notice those things. Just going subtly, going slowly. It's posing an interesting question, then guiding awareness to sense specific parts of ourselves, how they participate. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it learning experience. My experience with my feet is much different from in the beginning, especially my right foot, really curiously. My right foot's just really flattened out, and I feel my left foot even more clearly. And it's a very interesting experience. So that was a beautiful example of using novelty, using less effort, guiding attention, and making a systemic change.
Yes, and you were describing how your awareness of your feet after the experiment gave you some curiosity. You're like interested in that. What's the difference between my right foot and my left? And what's going on there? So we continue to ask questions, but we don't try to control it. We allow the awareness of our experiments to bubble up and inform us. And the nervous system actually begins to change itself. And that's part of the magic of the Feldenkrais method.
It does. The nervous system wakes up, motor cortex, the sensory motor cortex wake up, and movement just becomes more complete and more alive. So now, I mean, if you were to walk a little bit or move around, you'd probably find the sensation of your legs, your pelvis, your feet. It's much more in your awareness. It's much more participating in what Dr. Feldenkrais described as a self-image. So the more complete our self-image is, the more complete our movement is. The less effort it takes, the easier it is, and the more satisfying it is.
And by working with the sensitivity of the feet and following the changes in your whole skeleton, your nervous system, functions like balance, standing and turning improve. So there's a leap from this kind of awareness into daily activities. It's marvelous.
It is. It is. It's really cool.
And this is a snippet, really, of an awareness through movement lesson. So we have lessons where we stay with the movement of the feet, introduce other variations. We do this lying down with the legs bent and the feet standing or sitting or standing. And in all of those different ways, we contribute to the change in the nervous system and the development of awareness, and then to the change of self-image. And in neuroscience, sometimes we call that the mental mind map of the body. And some people have that very well developed and others do not. But it's a skill. So you start wherever you begin, and then you build on that skill. And there's also no end to the sensitivity and awareness that you can develop with your self-observation and awareness.
And developing that self-image or the mental mind map, this is a really interesting idea. You mentioned some people have a more complete map, like athletes. You know, you can imagine Michael Jordan, his mind map of himself is probably more complete than, say, mine was, especially growing up. You know, but now as a practitioner and done this kind of work for quite a while, I have a much more complete sense of my self-image. I'm no Michael Jordan, and I never will be. It's just interesting to me how development takes us in different paths. And some people have a more complete development where they have a more complete self-image. And others of us, you know, say the common person or somebody like myself who had a lot of developmental difficulties, you know, really needs to do the work to complete our self-image, to really resolve a lot of the incompleteness that we didn't get when we grew up because there was confusion or there was trauma or, you know, any number of things that get in the way.
Yeah, all kinds of things can get in the way. And in the Feldenkrais method, we orient toward the present and what we're learning and how we build these skills. Now, another neuroscience reference that's really interesting is classical fMRI studies show that taxi drivers have really developed their ability basically to find their way around, to know where they are in space. And in the old days, a taxi driver had to pass a test. For example, if you were a taxi driver in London, you had to know where the location of addresses were. And so you learned a lot before becoming a taxi driver. I mean, nowadays things are different in some ways, but I think it's fascinating that the brain actually reflects what you spend your time on.
So I know the study you're talking about, and they measured part of the brain that creates a map of the environment. And they measured it on people who were not taxi cab drivers, and then those who have been driving taxi cab for 2 or more years. And it's much bigger in the taxi cab drivers who've been driving for 2 or more years. It actually grows to accommodate the map of reality, I guess, the map of the world in which they have to travel.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do a study of the brains of Feldenkrais practitioners that have completed a 4-year training and see from the beginning to the end how that mental mind map is reflected in the brain?
That would be really cool. That'd be a really cool study.
I hope someday we're able to do that.
Yeah, that would be really neat. I would really be interested to see what changes. There's going to be changes.
Definitely going to be changes. So another aspect of this way of learning in the Feldenkrais method is that it's very kind and gentle. So traditionally, we know that education can be rather punitive. It can be really hard on students. They're reprimanded, they're contained, as we said earlier. And people learn to, like you said, tighten up, shut down. They actually learn not to follow their curiosity. And in the Feldenkrais method, we're encouraging ourselves and others all the time to do the work in this very friendly, kind way. So there's safety and there's a sense of opening up to oneself and the world. And all kinds of things become interesting. I had a man in my training program that was in his 70s, and he took up inline skating. He'd never skated in his life. I mean, people come up with this. Another woman had always had the dream of becoming a professional speaker. She began to perform for the first time after her Feldenkrais training, and she was in her 40s. So people come up with these exciting things to explore, first-time explorations as adults.
Yeah, it's one of the really amazing things about Feldenkrais lessons. You don't have to be in a training to get that benefit. You can take a class. You can join Donna's class or one of my classes or many other classes that are out there, or listen to one of our products we've created. You can have that same kind of experience, because when we're taking you through a lesson like that, we're encouraging curiosity. We're encouraging you to go slowly, encouraging you to really sense yourself and become engaged with yourself in a really unique and creative way. And through that, you have these challenges and you have these little problems of how do you do this movement, engage your curiosity, and you learn from that. And by doing that, if we can just kind of go to talk about a habit for a few moments, talk about our habits. When we're asked to do these movements, the only way we have to make sense out of doing those instructions is by modifying our habits. So if it's a mismatch for the habit, we have to start to change our habits to be able to do the movements. And this actually starts to lay down new neural pathways in the brain and open up the nervous system. And this is what the kind of learning we're talking about, where we take our habits and we're modifying them, we're improving them, we're laying down new neurology, new neural pathways, so we have more choice, more spontaneity in the way we go about moving, responding, living, and experiencing the world.
As you're speaking, I'm listening, and what caught my attention was the way that we lay down new pathways. So often we want to break a habit, but instead of focusing on breaking a habit, it actually is easier to install a new habit. Because the old habit, in fact, we know that the brain is going to have those pathways of the old habit. And instead of trying to get rid of those pathways, we want to encourage a new pathway. So if you're on a sled and you're riding down a hill in the snow, and you keep going down that path over and over, it becomes more more grooved. It becomes deeper and deeper. And then you move the sled over, you take it down, and that's not as deep to begin with. It's sometimes even a little bit more bumpy. So if you think of it like that, just move over, try something else. And if you like it, do it again and do it again. So you gravitate toward what's easier and you stay with it. And pretty soon you've actually created a new groove, a new pathway in your nervous system. And then you go to that one and you start to forget about the old one.
I was thinking as you're talking about that, how we use metaphors to describe this, like I'm in such a rut. You know? And so it really describes going, basically you're saying, I've got the same habits over and over again. I'm kind of tired of them. I need some novelty in my life. And so, try something different. Try a variation. And Feldenkrais lessons just teach you how to do that. And it's not something you just have to do in a Feldenkrais lesson. Once you learn that as a skill, and you start to recognize, I'm feeling kind of stuck, then you can go, I need some novelty. I need to do something different. I need to try a different pathway. And so you can stimulate your nervous system and make a change in your life like that.
Yeah, you might even say, I think I need a new groove. Let's get some grooving going on, start a new groove.
Yeah.
And, people so often do that at the end of the year. They come up with their resolutions and plans. Or if it's their birthday, they think, okay, it's the beginning of my new birth year. I'm going to come up with some new ways to groove. And they do it because they give thought to what they'd like to be doing differently in advance, whether it's subconsciously or consciously with their lists.
Yeah, there's plenty of studies out there that really validate that people who set goals are more likely to achieve them. I mean, that sounds kind of silly in a way.
It does, but it's simple and accurate.
Yeah, and it's even more powerful if you share them with people. So you start to have a shared consciousness, shared intention with other people about what you want to do in life. I mean, that makes it even more likely that you're going to get to do what you want to do.
So one of the things I've been thinking about doing, and maybe I'll start that today, is putting on some music and just dancing around the living room. Just every day, dance around the house, dance around the living room. I do it occasionally now. It makes me so happy. I think I'd like to do it every day, at least once.
Nice. A goal I've set for myself for this year is I have a reading list of actually some old books that I found in PDF form. And they go back to some of the early NLP writings, Structure of Magic, Hypnotic Patterns of Milton H. Erickson, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I figured out how I can get those on my phone and have my phone read them to me. And so I'm really excited about going through some of these old texts and listening to those. That's, one of my goals that I've set for myself this year.
I hope you can help me with that too.
I can.
Great. Well, I think this has been really fun. I mean, I always love talking to you, Al, and I love the subject matter. We could go on, but maybe this is enough for now. What do you think?
I think it's great. Yeah, I love talking with you too. And we just carry on this conversation again and again and again. I think that's one of the fun things about doing a podcast like this is that, it's really free form. We have an idea around which we want to talk about, and then we can just go into it and share our experiences and ideas. I heard somebody recently once describe podcasting as one of the most intimate forms of communication out there right now, more than email, more than YouTube video, more than Instagram, all that stuff, because it's two people having a conversation.
Yeah, I love it.
On that, and that's awesome.
And if you'd like to get in on the conversation, you can go to Feldenkrais for Life and send us questions or comment. We'd love to have you involved. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. If you'd like to follow up with a question, send an email to info@feldenkreisforlife.com. We would love to hear from you.
You can learn more about us on our websites.
You can find Al at achievingexcellence.com.
You can visit my site to join my classes and reach out to me for private lessons online or in my Longmont studio. You'll find my store, the Feldenkrais store, there as well. We can purchase books, audio products, and videos. Donna's website is donnaray.com.
And if you visit my website, you'll find that I'm offering individual sessions, group classes in the Feldenkrais method, mentoring groups, professional Feldenkrais training program information, and recorded lessons.
Thank you again so much for joining us. I look forward to you hearing us next week.
Bye now.
Bye.